Assumptions bring so much unnecessary pain in relationships. That's why we actually have 3 different ways of getting at our assumptions. The first was last week through the community temperature reading when we introduced puzzles. The second we just learned in Stop Mind Reading. This third one is going to be found now in Clarifying Expectations, the title of this skill. This one helps us recognize what expectations we have a right to and how to clarify our expectations with others. Listen, people quit their jobs over unmet expectations. Churches split over unmet expectations. Couples divorce over unmet expectations. Families stop talking to one another over unmet expectations. Friends do as well.
All of us grew up taking in thousands upon thousands of messages around expectations. And these messages came from our families, cultures, TV, social media, schools, friends, even fairy tales. Think for a moment just about the area of marriage. What expectations about marriage did you receive from your family? Was it wives will be in charge of the house and husbands will pay the bills? Or what did you learn from fairy tales about marriage? That you'll live happily ever after? Or how about from love songs? That romance and love comes naturally and you don't have to work at it? Holidays and birthdays also come with a ton of expectations. Here's a list of expectations that we've collected from people about Christmas. We'll buy each other gifts of equal value. Every Christmas, everyone will get along. No one will get out of hand. Every Christmas, children will be grateful and well-behaved. Or guests will bring food. Or everyone will help clean up. As you think about those expectations, what do you notice? Some may be unrealistic, like everyone will get along and there will be no tension. If for the last 10 years there's tension and conflict between Uncle John and Aunt Mary, then it's probably unrealistic to expect that won't happen this year. How about buying each other's gifts of equal value? You didn't even know you had an expectation around money spent on gifts until you gave a $100 gift card and received a $5 gift. Sometimes we're unconscious of our expectations until we get disappointed. And finally, you just assumed everyone would offer to bring food without you having to ask, but they didn't. And now you're resentful because you have to cook the whole meal by yourself. So sometimes our expectations are unspoken. So there are actually 4 problems with expectations. 1, they are a problem when they are unconscious. What I mean by that is sometimes we have expectations that we didn't even know we had until we are disappointed.
So for example, I expected all of our children, we have 4 daughters, to be straight A students, until one of my daughters started getting B's and C's. I wasn't even conscious I had the expectation until it happened, and then I was disappointed.
And early in our marriage, I had no idea I expected Pete to work around our house the way my dad did when I was growing up. And when Pete wasn't fixing things on his days off, I felt annoyed and irritated. And I'm thinking to myself, isn't this his job? So sometimes, again, we're not even conscious of our expectations until we get disappointed. Second problem with expectations is when they're unrealistic. Sometimes we have expectations that aren't reasonable, or there's no evidence to support that it can or will happen. Here are some examples. My small group will end on time this week, even though it never has. Or those close to me will make my birthday special, even though they haven't in the past several years. Or someone told me recently that when they text their friend, they expect them to text them back immediately. And I said, well, what is immediately? And she said to me, 30 seconds. And I said, that's probably unrealistic. Thirdly, expectations are a problem when they are unspoken. Many times our expectations are actually never said out loud. For example, each of your colleagues will remove their food from the office refrigerator at the end of the week. Or the extended family will all help in paying for the grandparents' anniversary party. Or all leaders will attend prayer meetings. If you're telling yourself, they should just know, I want you to know this. That's probably a lie from the pit of hell. We cannot expect people to read our minds. Expectations must be spoken. And finally, expectations are a problem when they're unagreed upon. Very often, I have expectations of others that they never agreed to, or people have expectations of me I never agreed to. Just because you invited your son and his girlfriend for dinner doesn't mean they will come or have to come. Just because you asked a friend for a ride doesn't mean they will do it or have to do it. I also realized I had expectations of people they didn't agree to. I'd speak my expectations, for instance, to volunteers to be at an event 30 minutes before it was about to begin. Then I'd be shocked when they arrived 30 minutes after the event began. I later realized, although I had spoken the expectation to them by emailing the time I wanted them there, they actually had never agreed that they would come 30 minutes early. Think with me for a moment of the countless expectations around workplaces. Things like overtime or coworker birthdays or who cleans out the staff refrigerator. How about home and family? Do I buy birthday presents for my brother's children? How often should I call mom or dad? Do I go to the family Christmas party since I'm expected to? Even with neighbors, there's expectations about loud music after certain hours, or barking dogs, or teenagers' friends taking food from the refrigerator without asking. And expectations around churches. The pastor will return my phone calls within 24 hours. The church will help me parent my teenage sons. I'll hang out with the people in my small group on weekends.
Here's the million-dollar question. What expectations do we have a right to, and what expectations don't we have a right to? This skill helps us to distinguish between these two things. What is a valid expectation, and what is an invalid expectation? Sometimes we don't even know we have an expectation until we are angry or disappointed. That is why a lack of clarity about expectations can be like stepping on a landmine. Suddenly, you're in the midst of fallout and pain of a strained relationship.
So let's be clear about what makes an expectation valid. There are 4 criteria. Number 1, expectations must be conscious. That is, I have to be aware of my expectation. Secondly, expectations must be realistic. That means there has to be evidence to support that the expectation is reasonable of me or someone else. Either it has been done in the past, or the person has the capacity and willingness to do it. And I want to make a special note here around realistic expectations. The reason this is so important is that unrealistic expectations are a leading cause of depression. So when it comes to work projects or ministry experiences or family gatherings, you have to really think about whether your expectations are realistic or not. Thirdly, expectations have to be spoken. That means I have expressed the expectation clearly. And then finally, expectations must be agreed upon. The other person has agreed to the expectation by saying yes. So here's the principle. An expectation is only valid when mutually agreed upon. Let me repeat that. An expectation is only valid when mutually agreed upon.
Now, before we send you off to practice this skill, I want to mention a few exceptions to this agreed upon criteria. As our children's authority figure, for example, as parents, we don't need their agreement when we ask them to do the household chores. At work, where there's an employer-employee contract, there's already an overall agreement. And there is built into the marriage vow expectations that you will not flirt or be unfaithful to your spouse, that you will be faithful to them for the rest of your life. So let's now take a few minutes to do the exercise about clarifying expectations in your workbook. Follow the instructions, and when you're done, turn the video back on.